Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. Say the Lord's Prayer. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come. Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those that trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen.
This House is in session. Let us stand in 1 minute silence observation to pay tribute to the passing of the mother of the former Prime Minister, Mr. David Thompson. Minutes of the meeting held on Tuesday, 14th July 2026 and Tuesday, 21st of July 2026 to be confirmed. Honourable Leader, Government Business.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg to move that the aforesaid minutes be confirmed.
Beg to second that, sir.
Questions that the aforementioned minutes be confirmed. All those honourable members in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Meeting, the ayes have it.
Announcements, Mayor. Okay. No. Messages from His Excellency the President.
I'm in receipt of a message from His Excellency the President to the Honourable the House of Assembly. His Excellency the President wishes to inform the Honourable the House of Assembly of the death of the Right Excellent Sir Geoffrey St. Albans Sorbers OCC, National Hero of Barbados, on Friday, 17th July 2026. Signed, President.
petitions, papers, government notices, private members notices, notices of questions, reports from select committees, first reading of bills, statements by ministers, congratulatory and/or obituary speeches, personal explanations, motions for leave of absence, oral replies to questions, notices of motions for the adjournment of the House on matters of urgent public importance, orders of the day.
Honourable Leader of Government Business.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move the suspension of standing orders 6, 16, 18, 20, 42 subsection 5, 43, and 44 for the remainder of the day's sitting.
The question is that the aforementioned standing orders be suspended for the remainder of the day's sitting. All those honourable members in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it. The aforementioned standing orders are hereby suspended for the remainder of the day's sitting.
Government business, sir.
Government business is the order of the day. Before we commence government business, I want to thank and congratulate the Office of the Clerk, Deputy Clerk, and the Marshals in the seamless transition from yesterday for the House to be back in the normal position to work from today, as though nothing really, thing is back in same shape as it should be.
In the name of the Honourable Senior Minister, the Minister of Energy and Business Development and Commerce, to move the second reading of the Advanced Passenger Information and Passenger Name Record Bill 20. Order number 9, sir. To move the second reading in the name of the Honourable Senior Minister, Minister of Energy and Business Development and Commerce, to move the second reading of the Beneficial Ownership Transparency and Register Bill 2026.
Honourable Member St. James Central.
Morning, Mr. Speaker, and I take the opportunity to begin this debate by acknowledging the fact that it can, in all honesty, Mr. Speaker, be a subject area which is not only extremely technical, but perhaps very difficult for those who do not follow it closely or have a specific interest to be able to easily relate to. And therefore, for the purposes of perhaps more adequately piloting this piece of legislation, sir, I would try to break it down as best as is humanly possible. But suffice to say that, Mr. Speaker, sir, though complex and perhaps difficult to follow, it is a matter that touches the heart of every single Barbadian who is doing business in this country. And it impacts every single, or this is now a piece of legislation that will touch every single company doing business in Barbados. Many times, Mr. Speaker, under the old international business regime, when we spoke to these matters of transparency and facilitation and economic substance, and we've gone through a raft of them, sir, we were talking about large corporations, largely foreign investors, and related types of businesses. And so, Mr. Speaker, it may not have been something that very directly impacted your constituents and mine. But we've come to a point in time now, sir, where that is no longer the case. And so what we're proposing to do today, sir, is a significant enhancement of the beneficial ownership regime in Barbados, the beneficial ownership framework, in order to ensure that Barbados has continued compliance with evolving international standards of doing business and especially with respect to anti-money laundering related issues, counter-terrorist financing, and proliferation of weapons of mass destruction and the like. So that, Mr. Speaker, perhaps a good place to begin is with an understanding really of what it is that we're talking about when we're talking about beneficial ownership. Because there have been, sir, through the passage of time, as I just indicated, a number of pieces of legislation which have come to this place that have quietly raised the issue of the beneficial owners behind businesses. And those work streams, sir, would have been areas which involve the collection and maintenance and verification of critical information related to the people who are doing business in Barbados. The departments of government involved in that would be, for argument's sake, the Barbados Revenue Authority, the Business Compliance Division of the ministry that I have the honor to lead. And Mr. Speaker, sir, with respect to how they function, for example, the economic substance legislation would have required us to know who were the beneficiaries or the beneficial owners behind a business, so that if there is a foreign authority that wants to access information about that business and its performance or whatever, we are able at from the Barbados Corporate Registry to share that information with that foreign, legitimate foreign authority. And equally, Mr. Speaker, sir, there are those people who, for whatever reason, may wish to be able to get a foreign currency permit. And that, of course, is a special application which exempts you from the restrictions that the rest of us ordinary people have with regard to holding certain amounts of foreign currency. And in order to do that, you have to satisfy the Central Bank of Barbados about the beneficial ownership structure behind your business. So that there have been times when we have had to treat to this matter of beneficial ownership. But Mr. Speaker, sir, we are now coming to a point where we have to be a lot more substantive and perhaps, sir, a lot more technical. The beneficial ownership, in essence, is really that living, breathing, flesh and blood human being who is the ultimate owner of a business. In other words, that individual who stands sometimes in the shadows, but is the person who actually exercises substantive control over the business. So it is not a matter of what is the name on the letterhead or what is the name of the company, but it is really, sir, a question of who is behind the company. And there are many, perhaps let's just try to make it simple. In ordinary day-to-day existence, Mr. A holder may be the owner, sir, of a business which is a hardware, and therefore it is easy to recognize that Mr. A holder is the beneficial owner. And then you may have, sir, a different structure in which there is a Mr. P. Eastman and a Mr. A holder who together have a plumbing service or a variety store, and they are the beneficial owners of that. But, sir, life is not always that straightforward. And the truth of the matter is that we are coming to a point in time where we have to deal with those complexities now more directly. So you will recall, sir, that when you would have been at law school, there would have been a case called Salomon and Salomon, which indicated that there is a legal personality given to a company. And so a company is a legal entity in and of itself, capable of contracting as an ordinary human being would contract. But, sir, there comes a time when you have to make sure that the corporate structure is not being abused. And so, again, in accordance with the ancient Max principles in Salomon and Salomon, sir, you have to lift the corporate veil in order to look behind that corporate facade to see who are the real beneficial owners. And sometimes, Mr. Speaker, sir, especially in the complexities of the modern world, looking at and finding the beneficial owner or identifying the director is not satisfactory. Let me rephrase that. Looking to find the director is not satisfactory. Sometimes you have then to go behind the layers which include the directorship, sir, in order to access information about who is the beneficial owner. There was a time when we had an honorable member in this house who used to enjoy Shakespeare. And were the people of Barbados minded to have returned him here, I would have used an analogy, which I perhaps could still use, sir, because I'm sure you will appreciate it, that yes, in their wisdom, they chose not to, in their wisdom, I take the point. But Mr. Speaker, sir, Lady Macbeth says in that particular play, Macbeth, that she wants her husband to put on the image of the flower, while beneath that image, he must be the serpent. And Mr. Speaker, that is really the reality of what this world is about. The facade of the corporation, the directors which are presented sometimes, even the directors do not necessarily tell the full tale about what the business is about and who is actually behind the corporate structure of the business.
I remember the famous quote then, look like the innocent flower, but be the serpent under it.
Indeed, that is the correct quotation. Look like the innocent flower, but be the serpent under it. And so therefore, Mr. Speaker, what we have to accept early in this debate is that the mechanism that many criminals now use internationally is the corporate structure. And that is the way in which they hide the illicit fruits of their enterprise. They use companies, and the arrangements can be very complex. So that I may have, Mr. Speaker, sir, a company which is incorporated here, but, sir, it is in turn going to be the owner of a charity, which is the enterprise that is doing what I want that charity to do. Or I may have a charity that is set up in one part of the world, but is really doing business in another part of the world, sir, and it is in those other parts of the world that there are concerns being raised about the type of business that is being done, and so on and so forth. So that the challenge for authorities, Mr. Speaker, sir, is really the question of who is behind the corporate structure. Who are the real, actual beneficiaries of the money, and who are calling the shots. And in an effort to make this easier to understand, let me draw on history that I think we may all be familiar with to some extent. And I don't use this analogy in a negative way because it actually happened. In the country called Colombia, we know that there was at one time a drug, we would call him a drug kingpin by the name of Pablo Escobar. And Mr. Speaker, sir, he is alleged to be one of the 5 or so richest people in the world when he was alive and when his enterprise was flourishing, at the head of an organization known as the Medellin Cartel. Now, Mr. Speaker, Colombia is a very wealthy country, and it has tremendous export capacity. It has been exporting emeralds, sir, which is among the most expensive of the precious metals. It exports petroleum, precious stones. It exports petroleum, Mr. Speaker, sir. Obviously, it is one of the world's major producers and exporters of coffee, and there are several other commodities. And because of that broad base of commodities trade that Colombia had, Colombia was able to build out an international, what we would have called in Barbados, an international business sector, financial services sector, to support that broad base of commodities trade that they were doing globally. So that while we had a financial services sector in Barbados, Mr. Speaker, sir, through the years, and we were building it out on being able to compete on the fact that we have a good quality of business and a stable government and well-trained professionals and so on, Colombia was competing globally on the basis of the fact that they had scale and they had a variety of exports, and their substance was, unspeakably wide. But all that came tumbling down because of the ability of the narcotic traffickers to be able to use that international business sector, if you will, in a negative way. And so they had what had been come to be known as the testaferrato, which is a Spanish concept, Spanish word, but it really does what, quite frankly, our legislation has in the past allowed, and that is to have shareholders who are nominees. And the fact of the matter is, sir, you can have a director who is nominated. And in Colombia, there would have been multiple companies owned by Escobar, which would have been companies, sir, which would have had as their directorships people who were maids in his house or one of his homes, people who may have been gardener in one of his homes. He kept animals, Mr. Speaker, sir, the people who were looking after the animals. But they did not have any executive authority to make any serious decision. They were just there as figureheads. They were there, Mr. Speaker, sir, as what you may wish to call straw owners of the business. But behind them, the real narcotic kingpin and those related to him would have been the people who were directing the way in which the business worked. And so therefore, Mr. Speaker, sir, that, as we know, led to a virtual implosion of the Colombian economy and certainly their society, and they were placed in a set of circumstances where they had to literally build back almost from ground zero. Now, Mr. Speaker, sir, the financial services sector cannot be used as an engine for generating illicit wealth. And in a real sense, that is perhaps a snapshot example of what it is that this legislation is about and what we're here to try to avoid. The need for us to make sure that people without genuine executive authority, people who are only figureheads, people who are there only to shield the real owners of business from scrutiny, that they are not allowed, Mr. Speaker, sir, to have the ability to hide a paper trail that would lead legitimate authorities in Barbados or elsewhere to the real source of wrongdoing. And that is what we have to make sure we do. Mr. Speaker, sir, the fact of the matter is that the analogy I gave you is really the analogy of how money is laundered. It is the way in which, Mr. Speaker, sir, illegal arms are sold across borders. It is the way in which terrorism is financed. And those are the things that we are compelled now to guard against. Now, we begin this legislation, sir, early in the legislation. I believe it is at Clause 2 in the bill. We define the beneficial owner as the individual who ultimately owns and controls, through either direct or indirect ownership, at least 20% of the shares, 20% of the voting rights, the partnership interest, or other ownership interests in the business. And it is, or alternatively, is exercising control through other means, for example, contractual arrangements, veto rights, or the ability to remove directors. Now, Mr. Speaker, once we have been able to establish that, then we know that the beneficial ownership, or let me put it this way, we know where we are looking to identify the beneficial owner. Those people who own 20% or more of the interest in a business. Those people who have either direct or indirect ability to change the name of directors in that enterprise. And then we go, Mr. Speaker, sir, later on in the bill to have a requirement that that beneficial ownership information be provided, and that is not just name, address, date of birth, and nationality, but the nature and the extent of your ownership interests, the mechanism via which that interest is exercised. For example, if it is exercised through your voting rights or the amount of shares you have in the business, or whether there is any contractual arrangement that exists so as to enable you to be able to exercise that beneficial interest. So that there is now, Mr. Speaker, sir, a point at which we have come to in this life where there is a duty to disclose everything about the business. And in a real sense, the bill therefore has one central requirement, and that requirement is that Barbados must always be in a position to identify the real parties behind any enterprise. Now, Mr. Speaker, sir, in a nutshell, we are therefore here because the rules have tightened. There was a period of time when it was satisfactory for us to be able to have laws. And you have been in here a long time, Mr. Speaker. You have seen several ministers responsible for international business and indeed finance come to this House, and we make the case for us to have, and indeed the attorneys general, come to this House and make the case for us to have new laws or new regulations with respect to the way in which we tighten the supervision of business in Barbados. We have been at this place, Mr. Speaker, sir, having these types of discussions with respect to the laws, with respect to the regulations, with respect to our administrative practices and procedures. But we are told now, in no uncertain terms, that that is not enough. And that, quite frankly, while at one point it was good enough to say you have the legislation in place and you could identify the regulations and so on, you must now be able to show that crimes are being investigated. You must be able to show that there's fruits of the investigation. You have to show that by investigation there has been prosecution for illegal proceeds of crime and that the proceeds of crime have been confiscated. And therefore, Mr. Speaker, sir, there must be an ability to demonstrate that your laws are not only there, but that the laws are functioning and that the laws are functioning adequately, and therefore you are prosecuting all of the range of concerns which are raised globally. Proliferation of weapons of mass destruction, financing of terrorism, etc., etc., etc. Now, Mr. Speaker, this obviously places a tremendous burden on local authorities. And perhaps this is where the politics of this matter lies, because our constituents will say, certainly mine will tell me, and I'm sure yours are no different, yours will say to you, Mr. Speaker, sir, but what I
don't have constituents anymore.
Sorry, I beg your pardon, sir. Your former constituents. Forgive me. The memory slipped me. But our constituents, sir, you don't have any anymore. But our constituents will say to us, but that has nothing to do with us, because Barbados does not have any record of any terrorism. What does weapons of mass destruction got to do with this little rock? And quite frankly, they would be right. As foreign minister, I have had to make the case on behalf of this country that it is really an unreasonable proposition. In many instances, it is disproportionate as well for us to be being asked to speak to these issues in the way that we are compelled to by the international community because of the fact that these are just simply non-existent issues for us on this island. But the fact of the matter is that the regulators will say that Barbados is part of the international community and that your size is really irrelevant, and that your capacity is something that we understand and they understand, but quite frankly, in the scheme of things, in the totality of things, that too is irrelevant. That we have a duty to discharge in order to protect the global financial ecosystem, and while we may not have terrorists or weapons of mass destruction, we have responsibilities as part of the international community to ensure that this island is not being used to funnel or support financially the acts which are illegal, illicit, and are leading to terrorist activity or the illegal movement of weapons and drugs, etc., etc. So this is perhaps a different lens, but it is a new lens through which we are being seen. And may I say equally, Mr. Speaker, sir, that part of the adjustment that we must make as a country is to realize that there is a responsibility that lies on our shoulders now, that perhaps never lay on our shoulders before. And people who we thought would always be there perhaps to protect us and to look after our interests or support our efforts to protect our own interests are now the very people who are saying to us, your concerns are heard, but understand that the world has changed. Levels of responsibility and expectation are different. And we have to make sure that we fit into that and that we respond appropriately. So that, Mr. Speaker, sir, we are, I almost said adamant, but we are determined that Barbados will not be caught in a situation where we are unprepared. And this bill effectively is the way in which we demonstrate to the world that we are prepared to protect Barbados' name. Now, let me be very clear about a few things. There is a reality attached to the corporate landscape of Barbados that I cannot avoid confronting. And that reality is that in spite of despite what others have said and urged upon us, we as a country have to accept that all is not perfect within our commercial landscape. For a long time, we have known, Mr. Speaker, sir, that there were weaknesses which we need to strengthen. For a long time, we have known, for example, Mr. Speaker, sir, that the submission of information to the Corporate Registry of Barbados by way of annual returns has been an area which needed greater oversight. We have known, Mr. Speaker, sir, that while some people have done it very diligently, there are others who are very, very lax in the way in which they approach the matter. And frankly, Mr. Speaker, sir, we know that there are some owners of businesses who pay little or no regard to the information which goes to the corporate or should be going to the corporate registry and which should be updated with respect to the ownership of their business, with respect, sir, to the ownership structures of the businesses. And indeed, Mr. Speaker, sir, charitable entities operating in Barbados. And we know, therefore, Mr. Speaker, sir, that there has to be a systemic reform. That's just a nice way of saying reforming the system. And equally, Mr. Speaker, sir, we know that there has to be strengthened oversight and more diligence placed on the need for us to report and to properly supervise this sector. So we should not have been surprised when, since 2019, the soft law powers, as I call them, the Financial Action Task Force and people like the Financial Stability Board and so on, who are established in the international community as regulators. I believe the Financial Action Task Force has a jurisdiction over 200 companies and regions together. Countries and regions together. So that the Financial Action Task Force, Mr. Speaker, sir, is concerned at a global level with the need for us to ensure that there's financial integrity in the global system, in the need to ensure there's financial stability in the global ecosystem. And they make recommendations. I call it soft law because the weight of influence is really what drives countries like ours who have been faced with the recommendations that they make. And the recommendations that they made and have made since 2019 and again in 2022, and even before, Mr. Speaker, have been recommendations which Barbados tries to take seriously. Our challenge throughout the years has been in all administrations. I remember sitting on that side of the House when the Democratic Labour Party would have had a government in here. And Mr. Speaker, sir, the issues then were slightly different, but again, the impetus was being felt from the international regulators. And the challenge has always been, sir, that small states have limited capacity. And things that we perhaps might wish to prioritize in order to ensure that poor people got good housing, in order to ensure, Mr. Speaker, sir, that our children and and their parents are able to get from point A to B in terms of public transportation, making sure, Mr. Speaker, sir, that the quality of education is sound. All of those core developmental issues are then pushed to some extent one side because you have to make provision, time, and space for a debate like this, and for legislation like this, which I'm piloting today, and for issues, sir, such as this, to be able to be taking up the time and the attention of the most senior public officers in Barbados, whether they're in my ministry, or in the office of the Attorney General, or in the office of the Minister of Finance, or wheresoever else. And so, Mr. Speaker, sir, those are some of the challenges that we contend with as a small developing economy. But the reality is that we cannot escape the fact that there are some legitimate observations which have been made by the Financial Action Task Force. And what they do as regulators is not just to make the observation which they have made, but then they come to you and they say that they're going to give you a period of time within which we expect that you will have some legislative reform and that you will do those things that are recommended so as to have a revised structure to the way in which you manage your corporate affairs in the country, to make them more transparent, make them more accountable, and make them more compliant with international best practices. I say it again, make them more compliant with international best practices. And that if you do not do that, then there will have to be consequences which nudge you or push you in the direction that they want you to go in. So, Mr. Speaker, sir, the reality is that you cannot forever stand and complain that the international community is pressuring you when you know in and of yourself that really and truly this country does have some issues that we have had to contend with in the past. And frankly speaking, in spite of all the good work that we have done in the international business sector across administrations, and I deliberately try not to be partisan political in this matter, because every administration has had to be responsive to these types of issues. The fact of the matter is, Mr. Speaker, sir, we know that we have to be more diligent. There is nobody who is doing business with the corporate registry who can say satisfactorily that there is not need for there to be enhanced supervision, that there needs to be better enforcement. There's nobody who understands the business landscape in Barbados who is going to ask you to believe for a minute, Mr. Speaker, that every owner of a business in Barbados is compliant with the requirements of providing information to the corporate registry in a timely or adequate way. And we have to get there. And that means, therefore, sir, that government must do that which I am now doing, and be able to not only shape the legislation and bring it to the Parliament, but also invite corporate Barbados to work more closely with us in the spirit of responsibility and accountability. Because it isn't about one business or a few businesses within the country, it is about the reputational damage that can be done to the island and the jurisdiction called Barbados as a whole. And so, Mr. Speaker, sir, above and beyond the advice issued by the 2019 Global Forum of the Financial Action Task Force, which, as I said, they themselves have assessed and recognized that there are some weaknesses that we have to confront, then, Mr. Speaker, we also have to recognize that on the ground in Barbados, there are things that we must do and could have done and must do of our own volition. And we have about 30,000 registered companies in Barbados. I'm not going to give a headline for tomorrow's news by saying how many of them may not be compliant with all the requirements that are expected, because I know that is where some people will want to go. But that's not what the message is about. The message is that of the 30,000, we have too many that may not be properly compliant, and therefore we want to have that situation rectified in order to ensure that as a jurisdiction, this country can pass muster. It is not adequate to say that you've got some that are doing extremely well in terms of their reporting, etc., and then there are others that do not, and you don't worry about them, because we have to have almost like a rising tide that lifts all ships together. And Mr. Speaker, sir, that is really where we are going with this legislation. Now, it stands to reason that because for the first time this legislation is taking us out of the traditional big business kind of scenario, and it is now speaking across the board to all businesses in Barbados, that we have to realize that there are some businesses which are obviously smaller, obviously less well-staffed, less well-resourced, and therefore will be more challenged in meeting some of the obligations that will have to be met. And I will come to that. But before I go there, I also want to confront directly the instinct which tends to operate in Barbados, where we say, Kadir, poor fella, let's not have the legislation impact on him because he's a small man or he is whatever other type of man. Let the legislation only speak to certain other people. And the truth of the matter is, Mr. Speaker, sir, we know that outside of that instinct, there is a hard, cold reality that confronts the honourable member for the city, that confronts the honourable member for Christchurch East on a day-by-day basis. And that is that there are, in fact, businesses in Barbados which are run by quote-unquote small men in Barbados that have demonstrated that there are issues with respect to their operation that cause concern both domestically and in the context of what international requirements are. I don't want to get into matters which are sub judice and before the court, but we know that in recent times, Mr. Speaker, sir, there was a business person who faced charges for what is alleged to be, I say alleged, to be a possession of a trafficable amount of drugs approximating $2 million. And therefore, Mr. Speaker, sir, those are issues which raise a red flag of concern. And equally, Mr. Speaker, sir, we knew at the start of this year, again, there was a drug haul off the coast of Barbados that was valued around $33 million. Issues that raise a red flag of concern. And the fact of the matter is there are several more. So we cannot be mealy-mouthed about this issue. We know that we are not sitting in splendid isolation as the perfect paradise called Barbados, where nothing wrong takes place in our commercial sector, or that nothing wrong takes place at all. But in fact, that there are, in fact, lived realities in this country which give rise to concerns. And if we accept that domestically, then we equally have to recognize that the international regulatory agencies are going to be watching it and expecting that we will be responding accordingly, but more important, responding appropriately. So we cannot fall victim to empty sentimentality. We have to, Mr. Speaker, sir, to recognize that there are consequences if we fail to harden our legislation. And we've seen this happen in other parts of the Caribbean. There are parts of the Caribbean, Mr. Speaker, sir, which have faced the threat of being de-risked. And it may not be in recent memory of members of this House, and indeed people within earshot of my voice, but our Prime Minister had to go to Washington, D.C., after chairing a meeting of all heads of government here in Barbados, all regional heads of government, not just CARICOM, but the region-wide heads and ministers of finance, on the issue of the threat of loss of correspondent banking facilities, which is to say that the banks here rely on banks overseas for us to be able to access foreign exchange, for us to be able to send money to other people outside of Barbados. So you, for example, Mr. Speaker, sir, might not even be in the business world at all. You may have come to your closing chapter of life and you're in a retiring stage, but you got a grandchild who's studying, and you want to help the grandchild who's studying somewhere overseas to get some funds to cover his accommodation. None to do with business. But if you want to move that money to him legitimately, you have to go through a correspondent bank. And the correspondent bank's facility must be there for Barbadians who want to do that type of work, business, or alternatively, those who want to bring imports into this country, or those who want to sell stuff overseas. That legitimate financial supporting structure must be there. But if the foreign authorities lose confidence in our ability to properly regulate the Barbadian market and the Barbadian jurisdiction, then the foreign authorities do what we call de-risk themselves. And so their banks say, look, it is too much difficulty, too much due diligence got to be done with that particular country, and so we are walking back. And therefore the services rendered by the banks when we want to do business overseas are cut. And for those who still don't get it, let us understand that the easy thing now that all of our constituents do is to be able to get a credit card and buy a few things online. But that don't just happen so. There again is a correspondent banking relationship taking place. And if it is that those are cut off, then the few little things you're buying can't be bought. And so, Mr. Speaker, sir, once that happens, you have therefore to recognize that we have serious challenges. There are those who are less well off in our communities who rely on remittances being sent home from overseas. And that is just a nice way of saying that grand back home, living in Hoyts Village, St. James, or some other part of the island, and Marley Vale, and then grand can't get the little money that will be sent home by way of a remittance because her granddaughter up in whatever part of the world can't get the banking relationship to send the money back to Barbados. And so there's sufferation in the land because that little remittance can come home. Those are the lived realities that we have to confront. And basically, Mr. Speaker, it all results in financial exclusion, which must be avoided, and that the ordinary people of the country feel pain as a result of our failure to properly police and regulate the financial sector of the country. And so therefore, Mr. Speaker, sir, that is where we are with regard to the intent of this legislation. Now, as I said, it can be a little complex, but I hope that I have adequately indicated what it is about. Well, then the next question is, what do we actually do? What we effectively do, Mr. Speaker, sir, is to create a duty of care. And it is a duty of care, sir, which I can elaborate upon. At clause 13 of the bill, there is a provision which requires that a legal person, which would be the company itself, or a corporate trust service provider. And you may ask, well, what is a corporate trust service provider? The corporate and trust service providers, sir, are those professionals who are registered in order to be able to facilitate the business between the companies themselves and the corporate registry in Barbados or the authorities in Barbados. So there may be some filings that are required. Nobody's asking the general manager of the business to go and do the filing. Nobody's asking the director to do the filing. What has been done throughout the years is that you have those people who are professionals, and they may well, some of them might be lawyers, some are accountants, et cetera, et cetera. Many of them are well-paid professionals who act as the intermediaries to ensure that those supportive and facilitating roles are being played. And Mr. Speaker, sir, the legal entity itself or the corporate and trust service provider shall take steps to identify each individual beneficial owner, and that means, Mr. Speaker, identifying them via not only who they are, but via the means of control that they exercise. Remember, I gave you the Colombian example where you may have straw figures on a board. We want to make sure that we understand not only who is on the board of directors, but how do you exercise your authority. And therefore, then you can go behind that veil in order to ensure that there is not somebody who is literally pulling the strings by way of a contractual arrangement or whatever. At clause 14, there's a duty that via records of the steps that you take as a corporate and trust service provider, or the steps that can be taken, that you identify the ownership structure of the entity. So in other words, you're looking, therefore, at a history of who is responding to the notices being sent out, a history of what are the ownership charts of the company, that the due diligence documents are there in the registered office and can be easily accessed. And the duty is there to establish and maintain these required documentation at the registered office of the company. And equally, Mr. Speaker, sir, there is a duty that wherever changes are made with respect to nominee directors and nominee shareholders, that disclosure must be made within 14 days. Failing to do that, sir, attracts a penalty. And Mr. Speaker, the lived reality that we have had historically on this matter in Barbados is that the directors may change, but nobody can get around to telling the corporate registry or ensuring that the information is adequately provided for. And so therefore, when there is a challenge that arises, you then have to rush hot and sweaty to try to find out what is the real deal behind the ownership structure of this company, only to find out that Mr. Jones was once a director, but lo and behold, he seems not to be there anymore. Who replaced him? When was that done? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And that level of inefficiency, that level of inadequacy of information, those are things, sir, that the legislation is now trying to stamp out once and for all. Now, Mr. Speaker, the bill also creates a beneficial ownership register. And that register is the central virtual space where all the information on all the companies of Barbados, beneficial ownership information will be housed. The beneficial ownership register is there for all the information on all of the beneficial owners in Barbados. The bill will create a beneficial ownership unit to operate the beneficial ownership registry, and it creates also a business compliance team. And that business compliance team will ensure that information entered into the records of the register are accurate. The real owners obviously have to be identified. The information has to be updated frequently, as I just indicated. When it changes, there's a 14-day period within which it must be notified, and it has to be reconfirmed annually. And I'm going to elaborate on these things as I go on a little bit later, Mr. Speaker, sir. But beyond that, the information must be checked and verified. And the business compliance team is authorized, sir, to verify that information and ultimately to enforce accuracy. And if that accuracy is not enforced, we go back to square one, because faulty information does not protect anybody in this jurisdiction, and it certainly does not protect the jurisdiction. Now, Mr. Speaker, sir, as I indicated, we are therefore at a point today where for the first time, regulations are being brought to bear across the entire landscape of Barbados's commercial space with regard to what has been traditionally called international business conduct. But really is basically basic stuff. It isn't about international business really anymore. It is, Mr. Speaker, sir, that there are local companies. As I said, there may be Jones and Arthur Variety Store that have local directors. And the fact of the matter is they are operating locally, they're doing business locally, and there is a need to ensure that they too are equally accountable in terms of their ownership structure as any other business may be. Now, this minister sits on the Labour wing of the Labour Party. I have said so many times in this place. This minister unapologetically sits on the Labour wing of the Labour Party. And so I cannot come to this place, Mr. Speaker, sir, without recognizing that there are some lived realities. Small and micro business in Barbados are less able, less capable, they have less capacity to manage this type of process than some of the large businesses in Barbados would. And therefore, sir, the legislation speaks to what is called a domestic threshold company. That domestic threshold company is really identified as a company that is earning less than $1 million in revenue on an annual basis. That effectively is the micro and small business people. That represents the micro and small business people of Barbados. And a special regime is carved out in this legislation to look after the micro and small business people, even though they are called in the legislation domestic threshold company. So let us now begin to understand the politics in this, because we are accepting, sir, that government has deliberately designed the bill to minimize any burden that may exist on the MSME enterprises in Barbados. And this is done, sir, in 3 ways. I enumerate them. First of all, the filing process. We have determined that it is necessary to facilitate a more simple filing process. Now, I don't want to take it, and again, the legislation does not stop anybody. If you choose to hire a corporate and trust service provider, and you are a small or micro business, that's your choice. And if that's what you want to do, and you want to pay so-and-so attorneys at law, whatever sum of money to look after your business for you, that is your choice. But we know, Mr. Speaker, sir, that for the vast majority of people who may have a little registered business in the Heights or in Fitz Village or up the hill in Haynesville, Mr. Speaker, sir, or across the road in Torps, or a little further yonder in Redmond Village, those people, sir, are not likely to want to go and pay senior counsel, how much ever senior counsel charge per hour these days. So therefore, Mr. Speaker, sir, we simplify the process for them, and we say, look, the companies and societies earning less than $1 million a year, they have first option to have their business information filed via the business compliance unit that is being created under this legislation. We are not doing as others have done around the world, where we just pass the legislation and simply say fit in or face the consequences. We have deliberately carved out a special provision that enables and facilitates our small and micro business people to be able then, sir, to become compliant. Their role, therefore, sir, is to go to the business compliance unit, which will guide them, which will hold clinics for them, which will receive their information on beneficial ownership, which will vet the information on beneficial ownership, which will correct where it needs to be corrected, and let them go back, Mr. Speaker, sir, so that they have the accurate information filed in the beneficial ownership registry. And there is no requirement, sir, to secure any assistance from any third party, because the government of Barbados, standing in the position of a protector of small, micro, and underprivileged people in Barbados, as we have always done, sir, that is where we will be going with this legislation. The other option, the other approach, which is significant, sir, is that the fee structure has been, again, designed to ensure that small and micro businesses pay less money with regard to the filing fee obligation, because there's a need to update your beneficial ownership information every year. And we're saying to you, you must update your beneficial ownership information. In the past, when this type of information has not been updated, when it is inaccurate, when for whatever reason the flaws are there have been consequences to the reputation of the jurisdiction. But we are saying equally that if you must now do it, not only we can help you do it, but that you're going to be doing it for a filing fee that is lower than other businesses. And equally, Mr. Speaker, sir, we're removing the paperwork requirements of an annual return, because the truth is that the annual returns that companies were filing, or in some cases supposed to file, have not really been adequate. The simplified confirmation of ownership replaces that, and the bill now requires that you file, maintain, validate, and actively review beneficial ownership information on your control structure on an annual basis, and that is a more useful mechanism. Once we are able to, once it is enforced, then it becomes a far more useful mechanism defending not only the enterprise, but also those people who are in authority that have required this information to be available. Now, naturally, Mr. Speaker, as I indicated at the meeting of the parliamentary group yesterday evening, Matters of this nature also give rise to another concern, and that is the concern of privacy. Because, let us face facts, I don't think, Mr. Speaker, sir, that as humble a man as you are, and as much a man of the people as you are, you don't necessarily want the whole world to know what you earn. And you would not be alone in that regard, because I think most people in Barbados, most people around the world prefer that their earnings, their salary, and their businesses' earnings is not something that is published. And quite frankly, or what you spend it on, quite right, quite right. And frankly, Mr. Speaker, sir, the competitor of your business does not need to know what your business earns, because the competitor then will have a fairly good idea of how well you are performing. And a good competitor with that type of knowledge will know where to squeeze and apply pressure in order to get rid of you from the market so that he could be more dominant in the marketplace. But this is just the lived realities. So, Mr. Speaker, sir, the question of access to the information on beneficial ownership becomes a very important issue. No busybody can just walk in and seek it. No neighbor of yours can walk in and seek it. No competitor of yours can walk in and seek it. It is available, Mr. Speaker, sir, pursuant to the legislation. It will be available for the tax authorities, for law enforcement authorities, Mr. Speaker, sir, and regulators under international treaty obligations. And as I indicated many times, we also are part of the wider world, and we have international treaty obligations which require us to be able to speak to authorities. I give you, in part, one example. A couple of days ago, a call was made to me directly by a foreign minister of a state that I will not mention, and the foreign minister had a single concern. It was about a Barbadian who had several businesses. But there is one particular business in a country that I will not mention that is causing concern to the government that that foreign minister represents because of the things that that business is suspected to be involved in. And so therefore, what they wanted to be able to do is to be able to ensure that the businesses that they have in Barbados are not being used as a means of funneling illicit or illegal funds and getting around some of the international treaty obligations that that particular individual is going to have to be confronted with. And therefore, Mr. Speaker, sir, that is an example of the type of arrangement that must take place between states with rules of comity, where we collaborate with each other in order to protect the ecosystem financially in this world that we must all live in. And so once the court orders are made available, or once the necessary treaty is in place, or, Mr. Speaker, sir, once the tax authorities have indicated that they have a specific interest, then the beneficial ownership information is shared. Outside of that, Mr. Speaker, sir, the beneficial ownership information is sacred and sacrosanct and is not there for anybody's private scrutiny. Now, Mr. Speaker, sir, obviously, as I indicated, counterpart regulators investigating financial crime can access the information, but equally subject to the safeguards. And that brings me then, sir, to the other aspect of the privacy interest. It is important that we do it this way because, as I told my colleagues yesterday afternoon, Mr. Speaker, sir, your wealth, or a person's wealth, not yours, a person's wealth, may well make that person a target. And we have seen in other parts of the world, and I gave an example earlier today of one country where there was a lot of that. And there are others in Latin America and in the Caribbean where families have been the victim of kidnappings, and where business operators, sir, have had certain types of criminal-based attention placed on them. And so therefore, sir, the need for us to deal with this matter in a discreet way is very important as well. And so therefore, for those good reasons, the beneficial ownership register is kept private, but it complements the existing framework that already preserves and imposes certain regulatory and licensing requirements in Barbados. So, Mr. Speaker, sir, we are really here to close loopholes, as I indicated. The practice of nominee services in other jurisdictions has been brought to a halt, but in Barbados we still use the nominee services, and that will continue because there are some benefits to it. But what we are doing is ensuring that through the duty of disclosure, we are better able to control what nominees actually do and what authority they actually have in the context of the corporate enterprise or enterprises in question. Now, it stands to reason, Mr. Speaker, sir, that there's an obvious exemption in all of this, because any business person, any director who is functioning in their own right, running a business based on their own investment, based on their own knowledge and expertise, Mr. Speaker, sir, there's no requirement, sir, for them to have any concern. The bill is targeting those people who serve as directors at the service of somebody else. And the penalties, Mr. Speaker, sir, are also outlined in the legislation. If one fails on the first occasion to fully cooperate with the requirements of the legislation, you face a $100,000 fine or 5 years in prison or both. And if there's a repeat to that, Mr. Speaker, sir, the number of years in prison increase, as indeed does the fine. Of course, as with any piece of legislation which is worth its salt, there have to be provisions for natural justice so that a man must be heard in his own cause before he's asked to face penalties for enforcement or penalties for non-compliance. And so therefore, Mr. Speaker, sir, I think it is at clause 26 of the bill, there is a provision for Mr. Lashley, if he is upset or put out in any way about the requirements which are being visited upon him, that before he faces any enforcement penalty, he has a right to be heard in his own cause. Once those things are done and discharged, then, Mr. Speaker, sir, the duty on the part of the state has been met. And I think, therefore, Mr. Speaker, that without further ado, it is easy to see what we are really here to try to achieve. We are here, Mr. Speaker, sir, as I said, to bring about a significant enhancement of the Barbados Beneficial Ownership Framework and to ensure that this country continues to be able to comply with the requirements set internationally, but also, and perhaps more importantly, that this country responds in a manner which is adequate and in a manner, sir, which is timely to the need for us to be able to have at one place, in one space, sir, the type of information on the ownership structures of the companies in Barbados that will enable for our domestic regulatory authorities, whether they're the people at the Barbados Revenue Authority or whether they're, Mr. Speaker, sir, any other regulator, to know exactly who is doing business with companies in Barbados, what is the substance of that business, and, Mr. Speaker, sir, who are the directors, what is the real weight that is exercised by these directors, who are they accountable to? And those are the questions, Mr. Speaker, that enable for transparency to exist in the corporate affairs of this country. In the absence of that, mayhem will prevail. In the absence of that, we, perhaps unintentionally, but nonetheless, we do facilitate the risk of criminal enterprise taking advantages of the deficiencies in our system. And in the absence of having legislation such as this, Mr. Speaker, sir, as I said, we prepare ourselves for that unhappy journey into a domain where the very things that we hold dear in this country are now in danger of being compromised. There was a time when the international business sector, as we used to call it, was responsible, sir, for 1/3 of all the revenue taken in Barbados. And that sector, Mr. Speaker, sir, therefore, was the sector that lit the playing fields in our constituencies. It is the sector, Mr. Speaker, sir, that enabled continued education at our university free of charge at the point of delivery. It is the sector, Mr. Speaker, sir, that ensured that we have a viable public transportation service. It is the sector, Mr. Speaker, sir, that has then financed the underpinning of numerous types of initiatives on the part of the government of Barbados, including putting in roads in village spaces which previously were only cart roads. And Mr. Speaker, sir, therefore it cannot be taken lightly, and it cannot be left in a situation where negativity can prevail and cause for us to lose the type of investment and the type of business that we have as a result of the type of enterprises we are able to attract to Barbados, and obviously the employment that comes with it. And so therefore, for all those reasons, sir, we are taking this very seriously. We heed the advice of the Financial Action Task Force, but of our own motive and our own motivation, we recognize that there is an importance for us to enhance the enforcement in our business sector. We have to ensure that there's enhanced supervision and that there's enhanced compliance and certainty with respect to the rules and regulations in that sector. And with those few words, Mr. Speaker, sir, I am obliged to you.
Honourable Member for St. Peter.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I rise to add my voice to this debate on beneficial ownership, transparency, and a registered bill. As the honourable member who piloted this bill indicated, this bill is, as its name suggests, about transparency. It is about, in some respects, or maybe in many respects, using the term that he used, removing the veil. And while the honourable member for St. James Central indicated that it is sometimes difficult to come to grips with these things, those who read the New Testament know that at the point at which Christ died, the veil was torn. And the veil was torn in order to reveal what was happening in the most holy place. So that it is understandable, I think, when we talk about removing the veil, opening up, exposing to some degree and for a particular purpose. So that we are talking not about putting everybody's business out there, but we are talking about establishing a degree of accountability. And accountability is important. Those of us who participate in this space do so, well, those of us who sit on these benches, not those who sit in your chair. The rest of us are accountable to constituents, and we have periodically to give an account of our stewardship. We are asked questions and we have to respond. We have to be open, we have to be transparent. We have to say what is going on. We can't be hiding, ducking, dodging. We have to face our responsibility. We have to be accountable. I think, Mr. Speaker, that it is important to recognize that there is a connection between the local, the domestic, and the international. That is very important, and particularly when we are of the view that Barbadians generally may not be interested in a bill like this, may not understand the details of a bill like this. It is important for me to say to constituents in St. Peter that what we do here in Barbados impacts overseas. I think the honourable member spoke, for example, to correspondent banking. And that is an easy one to share because lots of people who I know from when I was a little boy who went overseas, I've said on a number of occasions, we could tell who had family over and away because the church clothes were different, Mr. Speaker. They looked different, and you could tell that they were not bought from, I don't want to call any names, I almost said S.Y. Cape Shepherd, but we could tell they came from overseas. We could tell they came from over and away. And people sent back items, but there were also people who sent back money, who transferred money. And it was not like nowadays where you could, people travel all the time and you can tell somebody, we'll carry back this 200 or this 300. People would have to send money through the system. And so if we are in a position where our systems are not considered to be sound enough to have a certain level of integrity, we could find ourselves in a situation where when you go to the bank in New York, in Manhattan, or wherever it is in the Bronx, and you say, I want to send this $1,000 to my nephew, that you could very well hear, well, we can't do that because that is not, your systems back where you're from don't meet the standard. When this matter of correspondent banking arose some years ago, at least when it came to my attention, I became very, very concerned. Very concerned, Mr. Speaker, because at that time, I was working in the hotel business. And when you're running a hotel, you have to buy teacups and saucers. We don't make them here. You have to buy bed linen. We don't make those here. People often pay you overseas because they go to the travel agent who is getting his business through a tour operator, a wholesaler, and the funds have to reach to Barbados because the water bill has to be paid here. The light bill has to be paid here. Staff have to be paid here. The money has to come through so that ordinary people in Barbados are able to get their wages at the end of the week or their salaries at the end of the month. There is a very real relationship between what happens in our financial system, the integrity with which it presents itself internationally, and any implication, particularly any negative implication or negative impacts that arise from what is happening in our system here domestically, so that we are not disconnected from the world. We are very much connected, even though we are only 166 square miles. In this 166 square miles, we have to make sure that our systems are robust enough that we can participate properly, that we can participate effectively in the global financial system. So I say to Barbadians what the Honourable Member for St. James Central has said: what happens here has an impact. What we allow to happen here has an impact. It has an impact at the global, at the international economic system level. Now, we have to be concerned because not just local businesses operate here. We also have multinational enterprises that operate within our jurisdiction. So what they do in some other place can also impact how our financial system, how our economic system is viewed in Barbados. And very often, workers in Barbados are working for organizations that have headquarters or other offices in places outside of Barbados. We have that with respect to our cement, but not production anymore, but cement distribution. We have it with respect to hotels, and there's still quite a number of thousands of Barbadians employed in the hotel sector. We have it in various sectors, so that how these international organizations, well, international businesses, multinational businesses, I should probably refer to them as that, so I don't confuse what Barbadians normally term international business as. These multinational corporations, these businesses that operate across borders, we have, in spite of their size, we have to make sure that when they are operating here, that they do not compromise our economy, they do not compromise our economic system, they do not compromise our financial structures. That is with respect to multinational enterprises. We also, Mr. Speaker, have a responsibility because Barbados has distinguished itself by expressing an understanding of how supply chains work and the fact that we have to make sure there is integrity in supply chains. Supply chains, Mr. Speaker, really speak to, and I'll give an example. There are things that are assembled here with components brought from other places. So we can package items here, but the plastic bag within which the item is packaged has come from somewhere else. It is manufactured someplace else, it is purchased, it is shipped to Barbados. I use supply chains and I talk about Barbados distinguishing itself because just a couple of years ago, Barbados was able, and the Honourable Member for St. James Central was actually very involved, along with the Honourable Member for St. James North, but very instrumental in allowing Barbados to become the chair of UNCTAD, the UN Organization for Trade and Development. Part of Barbados' contribution as chair of UNCTAD, Barbados hosted in this country the first ever global supply chain conference. In other words, Barbados has expressed itself on the international stage with respect to ensuring that supply chains have an integrity to them, that there's ethical behavior. And that will mean that the organizations that we do business with overseas, that supply us, that involve us as part of their supply chain, in whatever way, we have an interest in making sure that those organizations are organizations that meet some minimum level with respect to how they conduct their business, with respect to integrity, and I keep referring to that word, integrity, because this matter of beneficial ownership and transparency speaks to integrity. Integrity of business in our country, integrity of the business operation in our country, but integrity with respect to those outside of our country with whom we do business. Because, Mr. Speaker, we live in a very interconnected world. Barbados is a rock in the Atlantic, but Barbados is not on its own. Barbados and all that we do here connects with everybody on the outside of us as well. And so, Mr. Speaker, there are two reasons why this bill, or I should say two fundamental reasons, why this bill, why this proposed legislation is important to us. It is important because Barbados has to do the right thing. The Honourable Member for St. Michael South and I often joke about why we bring legislation to this place. We do not bring legislation to this place in spite of all that I've said about the interconnectivity and impacts. We do not bring it here because somebody say you got to bring it here. That is not how a civilized country operates. It is not how a country that understands its place in the world operates. We bring legislation here first and foremost because it is the correct thing to do. We have to make sure, for our own benefit, for our own peace of mind, we have to make sure that economic entities operating in this country are operating above board, that they're operating legally, that they're operating ethically. And that is why we bring to this place legislation that allows us to look behind the veil, or to, as the King James Version would say, rent the veil in two, so that we have access to behind the veil. So we bring this here because it helps us to understand what is happening here. It helps us, in the event that there's criminal activity, to be able to address the criminal activity, to fight crime, but to know what is here, what is happening here, who are the players behind what is happening here, and how that affects us here in Barbados. And then I would say, secondly, because we are part of an international system, then this bill and the legislation that it will put into force once enacted is necessary, because if we are to be part of an international system, then we have to abide by a certain internationally accepted group of guidelines. Like I said earlier, Mr. Speaker, we are not on our own. We are part of a system. And for systems to be effective, for systems to be sustainable, there has to be a level of order. We say among us as members of parliament, members representing constituencies, we say that in schools there's order, there's a board, there's a principal, there's a deputy, there are teachers, there are year heads. There has to be order. In church or other religious organizations, there is order. There may be an imam, a bishop, an apostle, a priest, pastor. There is order. On the blocks around Barbados, there is order. There is somebody who gives the instructions, and there are those who don't speak unless permitted to speak. In running a country, managing an economy, there must also be order. There must be order. And so this bill, to allow us to be part of a viable international system, must also represent our contribution to maintaining order, to make sure that the global economic system does not go haywire. As a matter of fact, Mr. Speaker, the Honourable Member for St. James Central, as a former Minister of Foreign Affairs, recognizes, and I think we all recognize, that particularly at this time, when there are all kinds of threats of, if I may coin a term, haywareness, attempts to throw everything under the bus or up on Mars, where there is disorder at serious levels, Barbados must show to the world that even as a small country, we recognize that we cannot live in a civilized world if there is disorder. There must be order, and so our contribution to the order that is required in the international economy means that we must be able to say to the world, yes, we understand what is happening here. We have a measure of control over what is happening here. We know who is doing the things that happen here. We understand who are the beneficial owners of organizations operating here. There is transparency, and we are monitoring that transparency. We are policing that transparency. And so, Mr. Speaker, on those two principles, I support the bill that is brought to this honorable chamber. there is also a component of the order that is important. The matter of being able to share information. The bill and the legal people call it exchange of information. I call it sharing. If we are to be able to manage our own affairs with respect, for example, to multinational corporations, then all the information we need to manage those affairs is not going to be here. There's going to be information over and away, overseas, that we will need access to if we are able to make good decisions. And so this matter of sharing information, exchanging information is vital. We need to know what is going on, so we need to get information from other places. Other people need to know what is going on. They are going to need to get information from other places and from us. And so this bill speaks, as it does, to beneficial ownership and transparency, also to the exchange of information, the sharing of information, because, Mr. Speaker, beyond the social, we live in a global village. We live in a global village, and so information, just like money, just like goods and services, information also needs to be shared if we are to maintain good order in our international financial system. And so this beneficial ownership register that is established by this legislation is a critical component in being able to participate, well, first, in being able to understand what is happening here, and then secondly, in order to be able to participate in what is happening overseas internationally. This beneficial ownership register will help us in achieving the transparency. I do not have to go into the matter of confidentiality. The honourable member who piloted this bill spoke quite eloquently and fulsomely to that matter. It is not that everybody's business is going to be all over the place. He spoke about people not wanting their salaries to be known, how much money they're earning. He was referring to people other than those of us who are here, because you just have to go into the schedule of a public document, personal emoluments, and you know how much we are earning. But it is correct that not everybody wants people to know what they're earning. I'm sure there are honourable members in here of certain types of council who would not want it to be known what kind of cut in pay they got. And Mr. Speaker, I'm not referring to you. I'm referring to the one who suggested to you that I was referring to you. But there are people who would not want their business all over the place. And so there are guidelines and guardrails on how the information in this beneficial ownership register, how that information is handled. And I think we ought to recognize that while we manage what is happening in our country, particularly as it impacts our economic systems, we also have to recognize that we live in a very small society. We live in a small society. Word gets out and around at the speed of light. And so we have to be careful. And I'm happy that in the legislation, I see that there are substantial fines for persons who breach that confidentiality. And so I believe it should be. The legislation, the bill, is very clear on who can access. And the bill is clear that the access has to be by competent authorities for legitimate reasons. So this matter is not to open out and skin out everybody's business in public alongside the road. This is about making sure that we can properly manage our business, properly manage our economy, properly interact with the international economy while safeguarding the rights and the confidence of those who do business in Barbados. So we need to know who the real actors are. And Mr. Speaker, I believe this is also important for us as a post-colonial society coming out of a period of enslavement, a society that has emerged with equal political rights, but, and I don't use that word very often, but with an inequity with respect to economic power in this country. Coming out of that kind of a society, it is important, not for any and everybody to know, but for the competent authorities to be aware of who is controlling what and how it impacts the country, but also how it impacts people in the country. I'll explain a little bit about what I mean. I don't mean to be cryptic, but I live in Barbados, in a pleasant neighborhood. In the world of work, sometimes workers do not really know who their employers are. Now, there are organizations set up that hire people, and sometimes those organizations are organizations of straw. Organizations of straw. Set up to hire. No real assets, nothing to go after. Just last week, we addressed the matter of protection of wages. And that is why this bill is of some importance to me as the minister responsible for the welfare of workers in this country. While a worker does not have the right to go and look in the register, competent authorities, and I'm reading competent authorities and those who have jurisdiction to implement law or to regulate. I think that is off my screen, but I think those are the kinds of words that I saw. There are entities, state entities, that are charged with the responsibility of making sure that things go right for workers. Those organizations, and they include organizations at the Labor Department, they have jurisdiction over legislation in Barbados. It includes the National Insurance and Social Security Service. They have jurisdiction over certain matters that relate to workers in Barbados. And those organizations, those state entities with responsibility for regulating activity in this country must be able to know who is behind this operation, who is responsible either for the good or bad treatment being meted out to these people, who is it that I'm supposed to talk to? That's the first stage. Who is it that I'm supposed to go after in terms of making sure that organizations do what organizations ought to do? It is not sufficient to say we go after directors. The Honourable Member for St. James Central was very clear that sometimes directors are figureheads, not the ones really calling the shots, the ones that have been put in place. Sometimes you can rent directors. There are certain jurisdictions where you have a corporate service company and their people act as directors. They're called the AGMs, but they're not the powers behind the throne. And I'm not referring to your throne, Mr. Speaker. I'm talking about out there. They're not the powers. They're not the ones exerting the real influence. Ministries, departments, agencies, statutory bodies that are responsible for enacting and enforcing legislation must be able to make connections. At the National Insurance and Social Security Service, and if I tie that to our labor clauses, public contracts legislation, We need to know, for example, if an entity is applying for a government contract formed 4 or 5 years ago, compliant with the National Insurance and Social Security Service. But there's another one who there is some vision about that owes the service, the National Insurance Scheme, $200,000 or $300,000. They can apply for the contract, but another entity owned by the same people apply. Now, Mr. Speaker, there's no way on God's green earth, and in some places now in Europe it is getting a little bit brown, but there's no way that that kind of bad behavior, that kind of nasty way of operating can be allowed to happen in a country like Barbados. And so that is why I say that from where I stand and from where I sit from time to time, there must be the provision for those with the statutory authority to be able to make certain linkages, or to determine, I should say, if there are certain connections. There must be that opportunity. We cannot allow people to do bad, set up something new, use the new thing. Or people who hire workers, then the workers out to sea, and when you thought that even, in spite of the fact that the letter says something, you know who you see every day. So you come to the Labor Department or you go to the Barbados Workers Union and you say, this body is my employer. You can't find the job letter. This body is my employer. Then you go and check and realize, but no, the person says, I don't have any employees. I don't have any employees. I may own the property. We need transparency. And that is why, on behalf of my ministry and on behalf of all the workers who live in St. Peter, we are backing this beneficial ownership, transparency, and register bill because it will allow for the statutory agencies responsible for managing certain relationships in this country to be able to do their jobs properly. It will open up the veil. It will allow us not just to peek behind the veil, but to have a clear view of what is happening behind there so that we can keep people honest, we can hold accountable those who ought to be held accountable. It will also, I believe, help organizations like the Immigration Department. Because we need to know sometimes if the body that apply for the work permits is the same body that doing the construction. Those are things that we need to know. Institutions at the Immigration Department, and I mention that not to take anything away from the Honourable Member for St. Thomas who may speak on that matter, but I share that only because it impacts workers. And anything that impacts workers, regardless of which ministry it is in, impacts me. And so we need to be able, the relevant organizations, entities, statutory entities, need to be able to understand relationships, to understand who is responsible for what. That adds, Mr. Speaker, to the same integrity in how we do our business, the same integrity with which we do our business with respect to worker relations as is necessary for the international financial system. So the international financial system is one element. It impacts us on the international level, but this bill also impacts ordinary people right across this country. You need to know, and I'm saying this through you, Mr. Speaker, you workers in Barbados, you need to know who it is that's responsible for submitting your national insurance contributions. You need to know who it is that really hired you. You need to know the relationship between your employer and the business that you're working at. And I'm saying to the workers of this country While you will not be able to go and pay $10 and have access to the register, those entities that are responsible for managing the legislation that allows you to be comfortable in answering those questions, those statutory entities will have the ability to do just that, to make sure that good is done by every worker in this country. We must keep all of us honest. We must protect our workers, local workers, domestic workers, well, not domestic workers, that has a different definition, local workers, as well as migrant workers. We have to be able to protect them as well. And we must be able to protect our public institutions. The National Insurance and Social Security Service is one of those public institutions. It has to be protected. And that means that the National Insurance and Social Security Service must also be able to get behind the veil, must be able, if necessary, to tear it in twain and see what goes on behind, make the connections, understand who it is that really owes the money, who it is that we need to be putting some pressure on, stopping them from getting contracts using another name. Public institutions, if our country is to remain stable, if it is to grow and become prosperous, our state entities must be strong. There is no successful state that has weak state institutions. There's no successful state that has weak institutions generally, but particularly public institutions must be protected. And this beneficial ownership, transparency, and register bill helps with that. Mr. Speaker, there is also the matter that falls under my purview to some significant degree of the third sector. We always have to be careful that this sector, this third sector, and by way of explaining, because after 8 years, people still ask me, what is the third sector? I normally respond by saying, do you know the public sector? Everybody knows the public sector. You know the private sector? People know the private sector. I said, well, the rest is the third sector. Civil society, non-governmental organizations, faith-based organizations, non-government, non-private sector, the third sector. Many CSOs, civil society organizations, NGOs, do significant work, do important work, do work that it is not possible for a government to do effectively, because coming out of them is a passion sometimes that we cannot match in other places. These civil society organizations, NGOs, third sector organizations have to be protected. Mr. Speaker, we have to make sure as a government and as a country that these organizations are properly structured and, importantly, properly funded to do good work. Barbados has to be concerned about money laundering. Barbados has to be concerned about terrorism financing. As a matter of fact, with respect to terrorism financing, on the terrorism side, not on the financing side, but I don't even know if we know if there's a possible connection. But we have always to remember that when this Barbados Labour Party came to office in 1976, that one of the first things this government, well, this party in government in 1976 had to do was to face an act of terrorism. A plane that took off from our airport. So terrorism is something that we know. It means that we have to be careful not to be complicit in allowing it to happen in the future. Terrorism financing is a real thing. We have to protect our third sector to make sure that good or well-meaning organizations are not tainted are not used in these nefarious life snuffing out ways. We have to make sure that our organizations retain their integrity. And that is why this beneficial ownership bill, the transparency that it brings, this bill is important, because third sector organizations can become either wittingly, knowingly, or unwittingly, where people don't realize they can become conduits through which terrorism is financed or through which money is laundered. And so, Mr. Speaker, I conclude this intervention by expressing again my full support for this bill, my full support as Member of Parliament for St. Peter, a constituency that has workers employed in the tourism sector, in villas, all across this country, in manufacturing enterprises, in agriculture. On their behalf, we support this bill. I'm also supporting this bill as the minister who is responsible for labor in this country and social security, to say that the elements of this bill that will become legislation in this country are necessary if the workers in my constituency are to enjoy decent work, and out of that a decent standard of living, and if the entities that manage our social security, for example, are to continue to be sustainable. We support this bill. We commend it to the people of this country. We commend to the country an understanding that this bill impacts ordinary people right across this country. And Mr. Speaker, this bill will allow us to do good by our people and also do good as a member of the international community. I'm obliged to you.
Honourable Christchurch, please.
Sir, I spoke to my friend from St. James Central, and I said to him, normally with these technical bills, my job is to come afterwards and try to break it down into some simple format that somebody else who's not well versed can actually follow. And in our preparation for this debate, sir, the point was made that this is a quite technical and specific area of law and in the corporate world, and not to be ventured into lightly. But I wish to commend the Honourable Member for St. James Central on what was the simplification of a complicated process. His delivery on this bill, sir, his explanation, his fleshing it out, the imagery he created, left anybody with an understanding as to why we're there. So my task is actually simple, sir. My task is why. Why now? Why this? What does it mean? It's necessary, sir, for us to go back to the purpose, the principal purposes of companies, limited liability companies in our business structure. Historically, persons got into business, they got into business in their own name. And their business was tied up with their personal life. So you leverage your house to get money for your business. If your business failed, or you breach your contractual terms to somebody else, that person came behind you for everything you own in order to pay their debts. As businesses grew, sir, past the capacity or the wealth of individuals, as two or more persons got together, we know the concept of the firm, where two or more persons are in partnership. As businesses grew past that, sir, it became necessary to protect the individuals who were involved in the businesses. So that the concept of the limited liability company came about, and it created a separate legal identity. So the company, if it was James Brown, who was previously trading as a butcher, and James Brown then had a number of butcher shops, and he decided to incorporate himself and became James Brown Inc., or James Brown Limited, The limited meant limited liability, limited personal liability for the acts of the business. We blur that line, sir, to make the principals responsible for certain things. I think like VAT, I think NAS contributions, other things, we blurred that line, but the basic principle was that you, the individual, the flesh and blood individual, were separate and distinct from your operations as a company. So the company was responsible for its own debts and its own profits, and you're responsible for your own business. So if your company went bankrupt and floundered, technically speaking, if there was no fraud or malafide in there, your personal assets, your house, your children's inheritance was protected from the vagaries related to the company. It's necessary to create that structure up front so people understand when you talk about a separate legal identity for a company can vote for certain, it can't vote in the general election, but a company can vote as a shareholder in another company. A company can do all of the things that a human being can do. A company can own property, a company can have a bank account, a company can pledge its credit, a company can do all those sort of things, right? So, just to pull a name, KF Shepherd Limited has all of the rights as a separate legal identity, as a separate legal person, as does Wilfred Abrams in his own personal capacity. So, people, if they're dealing in business with the Honourable Member for St. James Central, they know Mr. Kerry Simmons. Sorry to call his name, but it's necessary for the example. They're accustomed dealing with him. They know his face. You go to his shop and you pass the money to him. You see the face and he passes you the product. If you have an issue with the product, you go back to the same person who sold it to you. You know that's the person with whom all the business arrangements originated. It is not the same for a company. While that might not normally be an issue, we're in the area now, sir, of cross-border businesses. We're in the area of cross-border corruption. And we talk about the FATF. That's the Financial Action Task Force. It's an international body. And they're concerned with reduction of money laundering, terrorist financing, human trafficking, things effectively financial crimes or the blurring of money. Why is this important? If governments or corporations do things, they attract sanctions on the international scale. We keep hearing that the one country has imposed sanctions against this corporation or this country. If it is so simple, when I run afoul to just go and incorporate another company and continue my business again, and if that one runs afoul to incorporate another company or get people to incorporate the company for me on my behalf, there comes a point where you actually are not sure who it is that you're dealing with. You do not know who is at the end of that. So, if I said, would I deal with somebody who I know buys and sells arms on the black market and supplies other countries with illegal weapons? No, I would say no, I wouldn't do it. If I know that person was a drug trafficker, if I know he used to bring the most cocaine into Barbados, would I go and buy things from his shop? No, I wouldn't. But that only becomes an issue if I actually know. So at some point in time, we have to provide the structure where the questions can be answered, where the ultimate beneficiary or the ultimate person in charge of the company can be determined. Not necessarily by the average person, because it is often not necessary for the average person to actually know that, hence the corporate veil. You sometimes need to protect people. I might be living my life simply, sir. I might have one house, I might drive an old car. But I have a business that is doing well, and I'm doing hardware and have a business that's doing well. And if people knew that that big business was mine, they make my life miserable. They want to borrow money, they want to come for loan, they might target me, they might want to break in my house because the money's stored under the mattress. So we do have to create the protection and understand the reason for the creation of the corporate person in the first place. there's still a reason and a need to protect the separate legal identity and to protect those who are behind most corporate enterprises. But while that may be so in the normal course of things, it cannot be a case that the state or regulatory bodies hit a veil or hit a roadblock in trying to determine who is the ultimate person. A state, if Barbados allows a known terrorist to come and set up a company in Barbados, or is determined that that person is at the ultimate end, the ultimate beneficial owner of a company that might be even doing legitimate business in Barbados, that would expose Barbados to a number of sanctions. We just went through a rigorous process with the 4th round evaluations for the FATF mutual evaluations, sir, where we finally came off of a number of lists that we managed to get ourselves on in the last decade. There was great celebration when that happened last year, and the persons involved all received national honors at the last independence celebration. Why? Being on those lists cripple the ability of a country to do business. If you're on a blacklist or gray list, there's some companies that cannot be domiciled here. They cannot get the correspondent banking, they cannot get the banking overseas, they're unable to do their business properly, they're subjected to a whole set of other due diligence. So if your country is a country that's facing increased scrutiny, then all of the companies that are domiciled here and that operate here face increased scrutiny. So if you as a company made some profits and you want to send some of your funds back overseas to your head company, right? You can't just do it if you're in a country that's on a watch list. Then the amount of paperwork and the amount of hoops that you have to jump through in order to get that done make it almost not even worth it to continue to do business in that company. So that is what we faced by being on the list, sir. Now, crime is a business. Nobody is in crime for the love of being in crime. Crime is a business, sir. It's a profitable business in most parts. But when the criminals make their money, they have to be able to convert that money into a usable form. It has to find its way out of the criminal enterprise back into mainstream business. So money laundering, its definition, sir, is the process of disguising illegally obtained funds as legitimate money. A slightly extended definition, money laundering is the illegal process of taking dirty money made from crimes and making it look like it came from a legal source, cleaning the money. It involves 3 key steps: placement, layering, and integration. Placement, sir, is the putting of the illegal cash into the normal financial system, often by depositing it into a bank or using it in a cash-heavy business like a store, a restaurant, gambling. Layering, sir, is moving the money around through many different accounts or countries to hide or obscure where the money actually came from. And then most importantly, integration, bringing the money back to the criminal in a way that looks totally legal, such as real estate, luxury vehicles, or legitimate investments. So in these processes, the whole point is to obscure the original source of the funds. Everybody, sir, that gets held in Barbados with a large amount of illegal weapons, at some point in time you intend to sell them. They're meant to generate a profit. That profit is usually in cash. It's usually in cash or some other easily convertible form, like gold. Gold is one now, sir. Or real estate. It then starts to get obscured the more that source of funds changes hands. The more the money moves away from the original person, it starts to get obscured. Each time, whoever is helping along that process takes a little cut. But quite frankly, if you have $1 million of illegal money that you cannot get into the system, and you send it around and it comes back to you as $900,000 of clean money, that's $900,000 you didn't have before. As the money starts to move in the system, as it starts to move through businesses, now, the criminal is not going to send his money far from where he has control of it. So it's going to move from one aspect under his control to another aspect under his control. By the time it comes full circle back around, it may have appeared to have gone through 8 or 10 different persons or entities. But very likely, when you look at it closer, those 8 or 10 different entities are related in some way back to the person it comes back to. That's the whole process. If the regulatory authorities got stuck at each individual company or at each transaction could not go any further, then we would not be able to get money laundering under control. Money laundering, sir, by itself is cleaning the money, but it doesn't stop there. The FATF and the international bodies are concerned about money laundering, yes, but money laundering, sir, has other predicate offenses attached to it. When the money laundering is used to finance terrorism, when the funds go, nobody is going to pull their money and send it to ISIS. There are very few people, sir, that are going to say, I want to do a wire transaction to ISIS bank account at wherever. They put that money somewhere with one person. It then goes to somebody, and then it eventually finds its way to ISIS in a form that they can convert it, or by the goods that they want, i.e. the weapons. When you use the illegal funds as well, sir, for the purpose of human trafficking, you're also running afoul, and these are all cross-border things that we're concerned about. Barbados recently went through, when we came off of all those lists, we had successfully completed our 4th round mutual evaluations with the FATF. For the Caribbean, there's something called the CFATF, Caribbean Financial Action Task Force, which is a regional style FATF body. That is who monitors us and who we have to really be in compliance with. They're the ones who are the bridge between us and the FATF. We are about to go into our 5th round of mutual evaluation. We just came off last year, sir. We are about to be evaluated again in June next year. All of what we do now counts. The last round to get out of the enhanced list, enhanced scrutiny list, we had to show we set up a proper regulatory framework. We had to show that we had a proper legislative framework. We had to show that we were doing all the things to create the infrastructure to combat terrorism, combat money laundering, combat trafficking in persons. We had to show that we were putting all these things in place, that the rules and the structures were there. We did that successfully. There's some of those rules that have changed. There's some additional structures that we have to do in order to become compliant for the 5th round. But the 5th round, sir, is also not even just about the structures. The 5th round is about how effectively have you used them. You passed because you put the laws there. But how many investigations have you actually done? How many convictions have you managed to secure? How many asset forfeitures have you been successful with? And that is where quite often we fall short. If we are unable to actually see who the real brains are behind a business, we can't get this. To be able to trace where the funds are eventually going, you need to know who the ultimate beneficiary of that business actually is. And that is why, sir, we are putting this in place. This is a matter of trying to balance the protection and privacy of the corporate structure and the need to know who you are actually dealing with. As a country, we do not have the luxury of dealing in ignorance. Every single person we as a country contract with, we need to know who the ultimate beneficiary is, because the consequences to us are too severe if we do not do our due diligence. If we even do it simply, sir, Let's do it real simple. Let's talk about how a process can be corrupted in Barbados. If there's a highway project going on, and I bid for the highway project, and another company, I am not certain I might get it, so I put in what I think is a reasonable bid. I then incorporate or influence another company to put in another bid slightly higher. But at the end of the day, I'm the person benefiting from the other company. I then influence a third company to put in a bid slightly lower. So I am actually rigging the tender process. But on paper, it will look like AB Inc., CD Limited, and we'll come after D, EF Incorporated. It would look like legitimate comparisons leading to the award of a valid tender, but that process has been corrupted because it's the same person bidding 3 times and stacking it. If we do not know who the ultimate beneficiary is, then our processes can be corrupted at every single stage. I don't want to say it happens, sir. I would just say, having made that example, you see how easy it is. But that occurs not even just here. Let's say the US, sorry, I don't want to call it a country. Let's say a large country has decided for whatever reason that they don't want to deal with X Oil Inc. And we start to explore our oil and gas further, our offshore oil and gas sector. And we take the company that submits their bid to us and is awarded the block. We don't look behind that. But we then find out that the company is owned by another company, and at the top of it is the same X Oil Inc. that is embargoed by the large country we talked about. Well, the sanctions are on us. We now have run afoul, and you can't claim you didn't know, because it is your duty to know who you are doing business with. So the Honourable Member for St. James Central, sir, explained the micro businesses, who has to do what, who pays what fees, who's exempt from what, who the government helps in doing their filings, who they have to involve professionals. I want he went through all of that, so I'm actually not going to do that. Sir, it is not about sharing the information with everybody. Wilfred Abrams, cannot pick up in my own name and go to the corporate registry and start to dig all the way up a chain of companies. But if I have a concern and I report it to the competent authority in Barbados, that competent authority must be able to continue carry out those investigations. If there is a country, and one of the things, sir, with the FATF and the money laundering and anti-terrorism, is that you have to have joint investigations. You have to have cross-border cooperations. So if a country asks me if they're investigating someone, they establish why they're investigating them. And they ask for information for us on a company, we have to be in a position to provide it. If you do not assist where the request is reasonable, well explained, and well founded, then you run yourself in danger of sanctions as well. So we're not living in a world by ourselves anymore. Terrorism does not affect one country and not another one. When you're trafficking in persons, so you're trafficking in persons from someplace to someplace else. Actually, usually from someplace to someplace else to someplace else to a final destination. When you're dealing in narcotics, sir, it's not just coming from whoever sold it to me, it's going from me to somebody else. And then on somewhere else. As the avenues close down, as the avenues with the, we all know about the strikes that have been happening in the vicinity of our back door. As those avenues close down, the threat actors look for other avenues to do what it is that they have to do. So we can't just hide our heads in the sand and say, Barbados, We don't have that here. We never had it here. We're never going to have it here, because those actors are looking for the easiest route to conduct their business. As one avenue shuts down, they look for another avenue. As one company is uncovered, they look for another way to do it. As people are concentrating on gold, you're looking at diamonds. Right? You're looking at wheat, you're looking at cars, hired cars. Sir, we need to accept that the face of business has changed. We need to accept that what informed separate legal identities for companies and the privacy back when the Companies Act was first done is no longer the climate that we're operating in now. We need to understand that there's synergies, sir, collaborations, and partnerships that were not contemplated at the time the first company was incorporated in Barbados. Things have moved on, and we have to move on with those things. Not simply, sir, to protect Barbadians ultimately, but not even simply to protect Barbadians, for us as a country to be able to do our business in the global sphere. If we do not put these regimes in place and these structures in place and bills like this in place, it affects Barbados' ability to compete in and do business in the global space. This beneficial ownership, transparency, and register bill, sir, allows the information to be captured in one place. There are many persons who have different snippets. It allows the information to be captured in one place. It allows for updating, sir. If you have ever incorporated a company, you must have, sir. But for lawyers who incorporate companies, persons come to you hot and heavy, they're about to get a contract, they want a company. They want a company, and you incorporate the company. And if you check back with them, they go to get a loan 5 years later. The directors change, they never issue shares, you don't know who the shareholder is, the husband and wife fell out, the wife no longer in the picture, but the person is still down as a director. What we are saying, if you are operating in the business space, at least once a year, update what is he doing. Right? You have to once a year pause and say, okay, this is my obligation now to keep my business legitimate. Once a year, I have to send in who my directors are, who the shareholders are, who is the ultimate person who benefits from the business. If you think about it, sir, it's not a hard thing to do. With technology being what it is, that's actually exceedingly relatively simple. And as indicated, sir, the fees are $150 for the small companies, I think $250 for others. And assistance is provided as well for persons who cannot manage it themselves. That's as fair, sir, as we can actually get with this. But it is critical that it happens. So I wish, sir, to thank the honourable member for piloting it. And I'm smiling because he piloted it, but it has direct implications for me, because Barbados is currently the chair of the CFATF, right? So I'm actually currently in the hot seat for the Financial Action Task Force for the Caribbean. And I am, as my predecessor, ably managed us out of difficulties last year, and he did a sterling job. I wish to commend him for that. As he ably managed us out of difficulties last year and brought us back into compliance, it is my duty to keep us compliant. And this, sir, is a necessary and critical cog in that wheel and in our ability, sir, to regulate our business sector in Barbados, to protect Barbadians in the comfort that the government knows who is in business with and who the ultimate people are, to protect Barbadians in that the government can actually, on your behalf, check to make sure you are in business with who you believe you're in business with, and you don't find yourself unwittingly and innocently running afoul of things that you could not even contemplate. So, sir, to the Honourable Member for St. James Central, as I said, I found myself in the position, an accustomed position, of having to deal with almost nothing legal, but just having to flesh it out a little bit to help people understand why we're here, what this means, and why it is critical. With all of that said, sir, I entirely support and commend this bill to this chamber. Thank you, sir.
Honourable Member St. Thomas.
Mr. Speaker, thank you for the opportunity to contribute to this bill. The Beneficial Ownership, Transparency and Register Bill 2026. Sir, it is a bill that speaks largely to the questions of transparency and the prevention of anti-money laundering and ensuring that Barbados has a compliant record to ensure that the corporate backdoor does not enable terrorism financing and anti-money laundering in our country. So I should also say to the Honourable Senior Minister, thank you for the expert way in which he delivered himself in presenting the bill with the clarity. And I've always learned, I believe we came up in the same school, that whenever you're introducing new legislation into Parliament, there are a number of indicators you must meet those markers. Certainty of incidence, clarity of purpose, reasonableness, and cost effectiveness. In his speech, I think he has marked all of those. And sir, I want to make a short contribution to this bill for a number of reasons. First, sir, I recall that it was the Barbados Labour Party that would have passed a Modern Companies Act in the early 1980s. Somewhere in the late 1980s, there was a conversation about the level of interlocking directorships across the corporate landscape of Barbados, at a time when this country was discussing the issue of black economic enfranchisement. It took the Parliament of Barbados another 20 or so years before we could confront that issue, when a former member for St. Michael North, Mr. Ronald Topping, who served with distinction in this House for a long time, sir, brought legislation to deal with the corporate misbehavior within the Barbadian financial sector that sought to exclude a number of people from actively participating in it in a just way by passing the Fair Trading Commission legislation and all the legislation that dealt with making sure that we would not have a situation in the country where people were hiding behind corporate structures to do a lot of unjust things in the corporate society in Barbados. And I want to draw the distinction here and to draw the line to connect what we are here doing. Because in the same way in which corporate directorships came under the microscope, those are the people who run the companies, who run them for their own benefits. And there were a number of the Fair Competition Act, the Fair Trading Commission, the Fair Competition Act. A lot of those pieces of legislation were brought in by the then member for St. Michael North to ensure that there was fairness and equity in the financial system in Barbados. And I want to suggest, sir, that the bill that the Honourable Member for St. James Central has brought put me in that particular frame of mind, because not only are we seeking to put a platform to ensure that the people who run businesses in Barbados and run businesses through Barbados are properly identified and ascertained for regulatory and legislative purposes, we are now making sure, sir, that we can have a register that ensures we can know who are the owners of the companies, the real owners, the real movers and shakers, not those people who are hiding behind a nominee agreement or shareholder agreement, or who are hiding behind these elaborate trusts and instruments that allow them to evade the payment of taxes, that allows them to evade the laws of Barbados, such as the obligation to pay national insurance, the obligation to fulfill commitments to workers in Barbados, and the opportunity, sir, to defraud other companies. So I had the unenviable experience of having to deal with a small contractor which had done a lot of work for a tourism developer up in St. John. And the company was incorporated here in Barbados, but really and truly it was a company that was operating out of somewhere in Europe. Another company. One company signed the contract, the other company was paying. And we had to use a number of other corporate tactics to get the courts to hold that there was an agency by estoppel. In other words, while you had a contract with one company, the contract was signed, another company was paying you for the work, and then stopped paying midway when the work was done, refused to pay the company hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars. And we had to argue that you were stopped from denying that the paying company was actually the agent of the whole. All of these things happen, sir, within our own country here. But young, normal, ordinary Barbadian businesses submit themselves to contracts when tourism development is going on, and then they find themselves in situations where they cannot get paid, sir. The shareholders of the company, we knew, sir, were the same for both companies. The directors of the company, we can tell because they had to register, and we can get a corporate search in the European country and here in Barbados to see that the two companies have the same directors. But we could not ascertain and verify for the purpose of submitting the evidence in the court that the owners were the same. That caused a little bit of consternation. But the fact was that the same person who signed the check was the same person who signed the contract, notwithstanding that they were two separate and distinct companies. This legislation also facilitates those inquiries in legal matters such as those where people try to hide behind corporate structures and vehicles to defraud the Barbadian enterprises who might prefer their services when they procure Barbadian services. Sir, some may argue that this bill is revolutionary in that it goes against the fundamental principle of Solomon and Solomon. And I think the Honourable Member for St. James Central did touch on this quite a bit. And if there's one thing I may just add, Mr. Speaker, if he gives me that permission, is that the main principle in Solomon and Solomon is not necessarily that you can't go behind the corporate structure established by the fact of incorporation. The real purpose of that case and the whole principle of it is that the assets of the company are separate and distinct from the assets of the owners of the company. So if the company gets itself into financial difficulty, the creditors and people who are owed by that company can go after the assets of the company, but not the assets of the owners of that company. And that is the real principle in Solomon and Solomon. But sir, beneficial ownership laws do not attack that vital principle in Solomon and Solomon. What they do, sir, is that they pierce the corporate opaqueness that is created by requiring the companies to amass the true owners, the true human controllers, the big names, the real players, for regulatory and anti-corruption purposes. So there is not a fundamental shift in corporate law. It is something that is important, particularly in a country like Barbados, sir, where we are trying to stop the owners of the shell companies from laundering money, from evading taxes, from creating environments that harbor people who are looking to do terrorist activity in the country, all under the pretense that they have a separate legal personality shielding them. So the government has therefore, by this bill, prioritized financial crime prevention, public safety, over a 19th century English principle about piercing a corporate veil. Transparency, sir, has been preferred, sir, over the anonymity principle that gives companies the right or the benefit, sir, of shielding the real owners of the company from the scrutiny of the state and its regulators. So a company will still, under this bill, sir, shield the personal assets from the general business debts. But what this legislation is intended to do is to allow the government to trace those who benefit from those assets. Sir, one of the things that I really like about this bill, among the purposes set out in the clauses in the bill, is the establishment of a beneficial ownership register. It ensures that the transactions, the records, the information, the documents are adequate, accurate, and up to date. And that is important, sir. Because if we are supposed to be able to meet the requirements of any of the international bodies that audit and monitor what we do as a financial jurisdiction involving international business, information has to be accurate and up to date. But what it also does set out as one of its very clear purposes, sir, is that it creates and imposes a legal duty, not only on the owners, and the nominee persons and the corporate service providers, but some designated intermediaries, so that there's no class of persons interfacing with that business that can escape the scrutiny and the requirements of the law to verify, to submit, retain, and produce beneficial ownership information, records, and documents. So the bill also sets out clearly how it is to be construed, so that my colleagues at the bar are no longer able to say, well, this bill clashes with another piece of legislation which specifies that this is an exemption, or that this is a further elucidation on the rule in Solomon and therefore there might be some conflict. No, this bill says quite clearly that where there's a conflict between this legislation and any other legislation, sir, that this bill prevails over that. That is an important step. Sir, the Honourable Member for St. James Central, in his presentation of the bill, made mention of the business compliance team. And I think too much praise cannot be heaped on him and his ministry for ensuring that this provision is put into our legislation. It is unlike, sir, any of the other pieces of beneficial ownership legislation that I've seen in other jurisdictions. And it speaks to the hallmark of what we are doing in Barbados, particularly as a Labour Party government, sir. This is a statutory duty to assist the small businesses in Barbados to ensure that they do not run afoul of the law. And this is the first time, I believe, that a government can be seen to be creating an institution which imposes on that institution a duty to ensure that the small man does not run afoul of the very law that has established the beneficial ownership register and the compliance unit. And that tells you where the heart of this government is. Because not only have we created burdens now, because you know you will hear that this now creates now a lot of administrative and financial burdens. You've got to go and hire accountants and everybody to get your corporate filings in place every year so you wouldn't run afoul of the requirements of the legislation. No, sir. What the Barbados Labour Party has done is to make sure that every business in this country that is earning less than $1 million has access to a government agency that has a statutory duty to ensure that they facilitate their own compliance with the requirements of the legislation. So that is revolutionary. And sir, another reason why I can easily support this bill is that the confidentiality arrangements in the bill are stellar. And you will see today in another piece of legislation where this government is ensuring that the provisions of the Data Protection Act are upheld by all the agencies of the state, and that has to be complimented, sir. But sir, if I may be permitted, I do think that there's a great value in this piece of legislation. It is not only about exposing corporate wrongdoing through the shell companies and the nominee arrangements, sir. The great value here is in laying the foundation for a financial system that can live past generations. A financial system, sir, that is built on trust, a financial system that is built on passing or creating wealth and the systems for creating wealth. And I will explain what it means, sir. This bill, sir, lays the foundations for a more productive economy. Why do I say that, sir? We're talking about creating a legal framework where we now know who are the owners of businesses. It is no longer a mystery. We're talking about transparency. And I believe the Honourable Member for Christchurch East Central would agree with me, sir, that every economy runs on the concept of trust. The corporate environment must run on trust. Businesses must run on trust. You, sir, at the bar, Mr. Speaker, you trust that when a client tells you something, that it is true. But more importantly, sir, you trust when that client goes out of your office and tells you, Mr. Holder, I will come back and pay you. You trust that client will come back and pay. But investors, the banks, the credit unions, the pension funds, government agencies, all of us operate on the basis that we must know who we're dealing with. All of us operate on the basis that we must ensure that when somebody says who they are, that information is accurate, that information is reliable. Mr. Speaker, and we trust that when we use that information, that we are not caught with our pants down. So that this bill reduces the uncertainty and strengthens confidence in the corporate sector in Barbados. Capital is not attracted, sir, only by tax incentives or lower tax rates. Trust is important because trust lowers risk. Low risk reduces the cost of borrowing. And if we can reduce the cost of borrowing by creating an environment of trust, we create the opportunity for more Barbadian enterprises to thrive in that environment. I believe, sir, that the bill also has within it the foundation, sir, to create an accelerated path to intergenerational wealth. You can't build an economy that lasts and sustains, sir, by accumulating money. You have to build wealth. Wealth that creates institutions that survive generations. That is the difference. Accumulation of money is one thing, but money is just an asset. Wealth is the real thing. And this bill, sir, says that ownership cannot be hidden behind layers of shell companies and nominee arrangements without a level of accountability. It strengthens something that is important to us, the rule of law. It strengthens and protects property rights and improves the corporate governance arrangements for everyone to operate in. And sir, that matters because ordinary family businesses then become more bankable. We know who is the matriarch or the patriarch in the family and how the business was constructed and who in the family are part of the ownership structure of that business. You might have a disgusting brother or sister or so forth, but they are not an owner, so you don't have to worry about them. And then succession planning becomes clear within the family circle, and this is important, sir, for a number of the small and medium-sized businesses in this country that are family-owned, where some members of the family might feel they have an inherent right to participate in the business of the company just because they are family. But they have not bought any shares, they have not done any work, they have not put in the sweat equity to keep that business going. But when they're getting to the question of succession planning, who should take over after daddy and mommy gone, then we can look at how the company has grown and who has done what. This bill allows those businesses to plan how the company can carry on in the future. And it will allow the legitimate businesses to become more valuable. because we know how many shares this person has. What is the level of ownership? What is the level of risk that a person who might have shares in it might pose to the company trying to do a particular transaction? Man, that fella won't piece of that business. I ain't trust you at all. He's a nominal shareholder. He doesn't have much shares in the company. It can be the response to any doubt. And sir, intergenerational wealth is important in that investors can now have confidence when it comes to investing in the business or acquiring or partnering in the business undertakes any ventures. Sir, another aspect which I find interesting in the bill, sir, is that for a long time, we all accept that one of the biggest paradoxes we have in Barbados, sir, is while the banking system is awash with liquidity, a number of small and medium-sized businesses in Barbados, sir, struggle to get the relative financing to take their innovations, their ideas, and their creations to the next level. Now, the bill, sir, doesn't force the banks to lend. The bill doesn't make the risk-adverse posture of our financial institutions change overnight. But what the bill does, sir, is remove one of the many structural barriers that small businesses in the country face. Better ownership information by way of the beneficial ownership register will mean, sir, better customer due diligence, quicker credit assessments, lower compliance costs, greater confidence in beneficial ownership generally, and improved risk modeling by the financial system. That helps small businesses, sir. Because you don't now have to go and bring out the affidavits and all the other abstruse things that financial institutions might ask you to go for. Well, you know that they might very well deny your application for financing. Banks can spend less time trying to determine who actually owns the business and more time determining and evaluating whether the business warrants and deserves financing. The result, sir, I believe, will be a financial system that can allocate the resources to those innovators, those creatives, those small businesses. Our problem, sir, has never been a shortage of money. The problem, sir, has been connecting the capital, the excess liquidity in the system to the businesses that really deserve it. So I believe that the bill creates this environment that the government is trying its best to develop, create a system, an ecosystem, sir, for innovation in the country. Sir, it is my belief the next level of wealth creation in Barbados is not going to come from hotels, real estate, and golf courses. It is going to come from the people who have the real productive capacity in this country, the people who can create the technology companies, the renewable energy innovations, sir, medical innovations. We spoke about that a couple of weeks ago on that medical transplant bill. Businesses in fintech, digital services, the creative economy like music, film, cultural industries, sport, sports business, and sports technology. These are the things, sir, that I believe can create real wealth in this country, sir. Those persons involved in these fields, the young budding students and young people with ideas in the country, sir, would require professional investors to assess their work, assess the business opportunities, do the modeling that is necessary. But transparent ownership structures facilitates that and the connection. And by modernizing our corporate structures in Barbados, by doing this in this legislation, Mr. Speaker, by introducing things like electronic filing, innovative within the context of this legislation, and the verification on ongoing compliance. The bill brings Barbados closer to a level of international standard practice expected by sophisticated investors. Finally, sir, we are a small country. We are not immune from the shocks of the international system. But what we can say as Barbadians, sir, is that we have been able to be resilient through all of our history. And therefore, a piece of legislation like this, when assessed as its capacity to strengthen our national resilience, has to be examined, sir. Resilient countries, sir, are those that continue to attract international investment, notwithstanding the climate, the global climate. Resilient countries are those that are able to protect their financial reputation. And sir, from the 1970s, when the late Sir Harold Bernard St. John and Sir Henry Ford, now of blessed memory, brought legislation to introduce the international business sector into this country, we have been able to protect our financial reputation, sir, throughout that period of time. Resilient countries are able, sir, to withstand the changes in the nature of financial crime. Resilient countries are able to maintain access to correspondent banking, which is an issue that the Honourable Member for Christchurch East Central spoke about. More importantly, sir, national resilience is built on maintaining investor confidence during the periods of global uncertainty. The stated purpose of this bill, sir, includes the misuse of the legal personage or legal personality in corporate law to prevent them from using that for money laundering and ensuring that there's a timely, accurate record of the ownership of companies for regulatory and investigative purposes by the state. That is not simply about satisfying the requirements of international bodies, Mr. Speaker. It is about protecting Barbados' reputation and Barbados' image as a trusted international business jurisdiction. The bill, sir, is not simply about who owns the company. It's about discovering what economy we want to own together. An economy, sir, that is based on transparency, that builds trust. An economy where trust attracts investment, and an economy where investment fuels enterprise. And where an economy can fuel enterprise, it creates the opportunity for others to flourish. If, sir, we can align the millions of dollars in the banking system with those creative people in our economy, the small businesses that have the great ideas, the next thing that would take a new sector on and take it to the next level. If we can make that connection, our small businesses and our creative industries can thrive, and the transparency ceases merely to be a compliance exercise. It becomes the engine for national development. And it's for these reasons, sir, that I support this bill. I'm obliged to you.
Honourable.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg to move the suspension of the House until 2:30 p.m.
The question is that this honourable chairman be suspended until 2:30 p.m. All those honourable members in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Me think the ayes have it. This honourable chamber stands suspended until 2:30 p.m.